I'm Brian V, and this is Why We Work. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Jayson Baxter. Jayson is the co host and producer at CTV News in Nova Scotia, Canada. He has been covering entertainment, sports, and news for over 20 years. I want to find out today how hard it's been to go through the ranks, to put in the time and dedication. Also, what he has learned about the people in the Maritimes. Join me today in my conversation with Jayson Baxter. I'm Brian V, and this is Why We Work. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Jayson Baxter. Good day, fine sir.
Hey, how you doing, Brian?
I'm doing wonderfully well, and again, I appreciate you doing this, taking the time to talk with me over here in South Korea as you sit there in your lovely home in Lower Sackville, Nova Scotia. Would you do me a favor, Jayson, and give us an idea for people who don't know the industry that you're in and what it is that you do?
So I'm a broadcast journalist. I've been doing this for 20, I guess this is my 27th year. I've worn a lot of different hats and had a lot of different roles, kind of trained to be a television reporter. But for most of the last 20 years, I've been a host and a producer. My current role is I'm the co-host and co-producer of CTV News at 5, based out of Halifax, and it broadcasts to the 3 maritime provinces on the east coast of Canada.
So, Jayson, knowing that you're in Halifax, working out of Halifax, and from Lower Sackville, Nova Scotia, my hometown as well, what would have been your very first job growing up? Something you did, it didn't have to be legit. It could have been making, some lemonade or delivering some papers. What would have been the first thing you did as a young lad?
Well, like so many others, I was a paper boy. I had the longest paper route in Sackville. Basically, all of the businesses along both sides of Sackville Drive.
I
And
had
then
that
that,
too. I had the
yeah,
same route. Well, pretty similar up the
it's the worst route in
McDonald's.
Sackville. My buddies would take them 5 minutes to deliver the papers, maybe 15 tops. For me, it was like over an hour every day. So
I got fired, Jayson. I was throwing mine in the ditch.
I'll be honest with you. I should have been fired if my parents didn't bail me out financially every time the guy would come to collect the money, because I don't know if you remember, it used to be Cleve's Sporting Goods right there on Sackville Drive.
Mm-hmm.
And being a big sports fan, every time I would collect money, I'd be
Go
going
buy
straight to Cleve's
something.
and buying a new hat or a new baseball glove. And my parents, they were like, "Okay, enough of this. We can't make this up every week."
How
I'm
old were
so
you when you started that?
sorry.
How old were you when you started that, Jayson?
I was probably 12, I would say, at the time. And then I got a job for one day at the Disco Deli. That's one of the places I delivered pay.
I did
If you're
too.
not from Sackville, you'll
I
just enjoy
delivered the
the name
paper.
Disco Deli.
I
But I
delivered
did
his paper too.
there. The guy that owned it at the time said, "I'm going to give you a job. Show up here tomorrow." I was so excited. I'm like 13. None of my other friends have a job. But when I got there, my job was to pick up all the garbage around the store, which, hey, that's
Yeah.
fine. I pick up garbage now. But when you're 13 and your buddies are driving past with their mom, honk honk, and you're out picking up garbage on Sackville Drive, yeah,
Did you
wasn't ideal.
did you start to do some other things a little bit more long term?
Not as a teenager, no.
So into
Very,
high school, you didn't get a full-time job?
yeah, in high school, I guess towards the end of high school, I started working at a menswear store. They don't exist anymore, but Jack Fraser's.
Yeah.
My high school girlfriend at the time, her mom knew the manager, and anyways, got me a job there. And I ended up doing that off and on all through the rest of high school and even into college a little bit.
So as you're in high school, Jayson, and knowing your career as a broadcast journalist, when did you start to think about, school, what you want to do in college, and how about that leading into your career?
Well, I took my good sweet time with it. I was always the type of kid that read the newspaper from front to back.
Mm-hmm.
Every day I would watch, I would watch the news, the same station that I watch now, the same show that I watch now, or that I work for now, Live at 5. I would watch that as a kid. I was always interested in current events. I was always a reader, but I was bored in school and had no idea I liked performing and telling stories and showing off, but I had no idea how that could translate into a career. And yeah, I did 2 trips in grade 12 and then took a full 3 years off before, traveled the country, lived in Vancouver and Quebec City, worked odd jobs, and got some life experience, and then decided at 22, okay, I don't want to work at gas stations and clothing stores for the rest of my life. I want to do something different. And so what am I going to do? And so that's what kind of pointed me towards, it's weird because it very soon, what the thing that made me think maybe about television journalism was, it was sort of like the dawn of like CNN, the first Gulf War. And I just kept watching CNN every day and just thinking like, wow, this is remarkable. This is live. Like, these reporters are on the ground telling this important story to the world day after day. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating. And I thought, you know what, maybe that's something I could do. I could be a television reporter. I love news. I love current affairs. I'm passionate about it. Maybe that's a direction I'd go. So very, very briefly, I thought, you know what, I'm going to end up being a war correspondent. Now my career is, there's no war correspondent experience in my background whatsoever. But initially, it's kind of funny. The Gulf War and what CNN was doing at the time kind of sparked something for me.
It was captivating for you. So
yeah.
What did you start to think about how you were going to get into school for that? Did you just do some research? How did you?
I didn't have a clue. I was so clueless about it. I didn't even know how to research it, to be honest with you. But I went to Bob Price. So this is 3 years after I graduated from high school. I went to Bob Price, who was still at the time the guidance counselor at Sackville High. And I said, Bob, I don't know if you remember me, but I'd like a little bit of your time. He was like, oh, absolutely. I went in and sat down with him and I said, you know what, I think I want to be a television reporter. I want to be a news reporter, but I have no idea. Where would I go to school? Like, what kind of degree do I need? What kind of diploma do I need? And he said, I don't know either, to be honest with you, but he said, give me 3 days and I'll research it a little bit for you and come back and see me Thursday or whatever it was. And I did, and he had some schools picked out for me. If this was happening today, there would be some really good options right here in Nova Scotia. King's College was an option, but being already 22 years old, I wanted to fast track it a little bit more than that. So he came up with a few community colleges in Ontario that he thought would work for me, and that's the route I went. Ironically, I've now worked at CTV with his daughter Melanie for
I went to high school with Melanie.
Melanie Price, yeah, we're good friends and have worked together. I don't know, Melanie's been there at least 15 years. Yeah. So it all came full circle from her dad to now her and I are friends and colleagues for a long time.
How did you find that? And what do you think about people taking a year off from high school? Especially if they don't know what they're doing, they're not quite sure, rather than just jumping in and following other people.
I think it's a great idea. And I know teenagers always feel a lot of pressure to know what they want to do, like from the get-go. I think some kids are blessed that have that passion and they know from day one what they want to do with their lives. But that was not me. And I think they're the minority. I think the vast majority of us, we don't have the living experience to really pick and choose and decide, what's the best future for us. So, I think rather than go to university and spend a lot of money from the get-go on a degree you're not sure you want, I think traveling and finding yourself, I mean, for me personally, it was a great experience. Made a lot of friends, got some life experience, made some mistakes and learned from them. And when I decided to go to school, I was ready. I was ready to commit to something. I don't know if I would suggest taking 3 years off, but yeah, I think if you don't know what you're doing, then you better figure that out first before you commit to school. And
when you committed to the community college in Ontario, after you finished, did you know exactly what you wanted to do, where you wanted to go? Did you start throwing out a resume, or how did you go about landing your first job?
Well, it's funny because very early on, I realized, oh yes, I made the right choice. This is definitely for me. It's really interesting, and it actually came fairly easy to me. The curriculum did, and I think if you have a talent for something in life, even if the work's hard, it can feel easy. It doesn't necessarily feel like hard work because you're just enjoying what you're doing, and that was. That was me and call. I knew very, very early on that, yep, this is the right choice, and this is the path I'm going to take right out of graduation. So I felt good. It didn't mean I was going to have a job waiting for me, but I knew this is what I was going to pursue.
What was that first job you did land?
Well, I hustled for it. There's a little bit of a backstory if you want to hear that.
Sure.
A lot of the people I went to school with sort of had this mindset where, okay, when I graduate, I'm going to work here, as if that company was just waiting for them, and it was usually in their hometown. I would have loved to have worked in Halifax from the get-go, but it wasn't reality. It was the station I work at now was actually the first station I applied to. Had a great interview. The interview lasted about an hour. And I had the feeling they wanted to hire me, but they just didn't have anything at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, well, stay in touch, stay in contact with us. And over the years, I did stay. I built a relationship there and did stay in touch with management. But anyway, I went back to my college. That didn't work out. So I went back to my college town, which is Belleville, Ontario, sleeping on the sofa, staying with some buddies, and just working on my demo tape. Mm-hmm. And then after my best friend, he got a job in the industry. And then that really sort of like 4 months after graduation, it was like, okay, I really got to make this happen here. Like, time's wasted. So I started calling ahead at stations all over Ontario and trying to set up interviews with them, and getting a lot of hang-ups and the odd interview here and there. And when I had everything lined up, I had my demo tapes ready. I started in Belleville, Ontario. I think I went to Peterborough, to Toronto, to London. I was looking for an interview in London, Ontario. They said, no, just leave the tape at the desk. I didn't have a good feeling about it. Went back to Toronto, to Kingston, to Ottawa, and I had a job interview lined up in Pembroke. The next morning when I got a call from London saying, we'd like to interview you, how soon can you be there? And I was so keen. I was like, what time do you need? And they were like, no, it's no rush. It's no rush. I think it was early in the week. They were like, do you think you could be here by Friday? I was like, I'll be there tomorrow by noon, and they were like, oh, okay. And I was so excited, called my parents from Ottawa and said, I've got an interview, and I got a good feeling about this one. And can I borrow a little bit of money to get there? So I bought a train ticket. Anyways, my parents were all excited. 20 minutes after the initial phone call, I got a call back from George Clark, who was the news director at CFPL in London at the time. And George said, what are you bringing with you tomorrow? What are you packing? And I don't know. I never really even thought about that. And he literally said, well, you might want to bring more than just a change of clothes and a face cloth. I think you're going to be staying. And
wow.
They're basically telling me over the phone that I had the job.
Take everything you have.
I embarrassed myself in the interview, though, still. I can remember sitting down with Derwin Smith, who was like, I guess would have been like the general manager of the station, plus George Clark, the news director. And right away, it just seemed surreal to me. I was so excited because they weren't interviewing me. It was more they were selling me on the station and the opportunity. And I just couldn't believe it.
That's a nice opportunity. That's a nice chance.
And this is 1994, and our minimum wage in Nova Scotia was really, really low at the time. And I had experienced working at McDonald's. Anyways, they said to me, okay, well, we're going to start you off at 5:33. And I was like, oh, wow, 5:33. Wow, that's terrible. So you $5.33 an hour. I'm thinking, well, I'm going to have to get a second job, but I'll work nights. That's okay, as long as I got my foot in the door. And then I don't even know what they were talking about. And I sort of glazed over, and then I looked at it and I said, excuse me, can I can I, when you said 5:33, you mean an hour, right? And the two of them looked at each other and they looked back at me and they just cracked up laughing. They meant 5:33 a week, which by today's standards isn't a whole lot of money, but 20, it's 24 at the time. But as a 24-year-old guy looking for a job, I thought I was rich. Are you kidding me? $532 a week? I'm going to be loaded. Yeah.
Knowing where you are now and starting with an opportunity like that, you went through a lot of paces to get where you are. Can you talk about that grind that it took to get to the position you are now as the co-host at CTV?
Yeah, well, like I said before, I believe if you really want to do something, you kind of have to just get your foot in the door. Like, just end up on the payroll somewhere. And then hopefully your passion and your work ethic and your talent will speak for itself. So I worked at my first job. I was hired in London, but that was a regional station, Southwestern Ontario, and they sent me immediately to Windsor, Ontario. And I worked there. My first job, I was a videographer, which was an amazing experience. It was a small bureau. I think in total, there might have been 4 or 5 videographers, 1 full-time reporter, 2 cameramen, a couple of managers, people in the back, maybe 11, 12 people in total. But we were very tight-knit, and I learned so much because as a videographer, I'd never touched a camera in school. So number one, I had to figure out how to shoot a news story, and I had some pretty amazing mentors there at the station that on the shooting and editing side of things, and the reporting, the being in front of the camera, the writing side of it came, I think, probably more natural to me. But I really found a passion for the actual shooting and the editing. I'd like to think I'm not a control freak in most aspects of my life, but when it comes to work, I like having a lot of control. And I found being a videographer, if the story was fantastic, that was on you, good for you. If the story was terrible, well, you're going to have to wear it because that's on you as well. You can't blame the shooter, you can't blame the editor, you can't blame the writer. You are all of those things. So there's a certain amount of pressure for that to succeed, to really to kind of, to make a product that you're proud of every single day. And one of the things about what I do too, which I think about it, I thought about it again recently in school, in high school, I always hated deadlines. I hated, this project, it's due in 2 weeks, 2 days, 2 hours. I always hated deadlines, despised them. Yet I chose a profession where I have a deadline every single day. There's a hard deadline. Yeah. And that deadline is, and I love the deadline now, is the deadline's excuse proof. It doesn't matter if you had a bad day. It doesn't matter what's going on in your personal life. It doesn't matter if you're having technical issues, a piece of equipment broke down. 5 o'clock's coming with or without you, So, there's that urgency and immediacy to it every day. Back to your other, so I worked, for 3 years in Windsor, Ontario as a videographer, shooting my own stories, shooting other people's stories as well, editing other people's stories, other reporter stories. But I knew that wasn't going to be my last stop. So I was always looking for kind of what's that next ring up the ladder. And I got an opportunity to work as a news reporter in Edmonton at the A Channel. The A Channel was just starting in Edmonton at the time. This is September of 1997. And at the ripe old age of 27, I was hired as their senior reporter out there. And spent about 9 or 10 months in Edmonton. It wasn't home. The people were really nice, but it was a long old winter. And my now ex-wife, we had a child and another on the way, and she was from Windsor. She wanted to go back closer to home. So I very briefly went back 6 months, took a casual position at CBC in Windsor, and then the opportunity opened up in Halifax here. But yeah, the grind of it was probably in some sense the moving around and being willing to move around. and having a family that's willing to move with you, that was a real grind. I think at one point I had like 4 major moves, like in 14 months. You know, we were just constantly on the go in the early years before I settled here. And this being home, I kind of realized pretty early on when I got back here, this was probably, if they wanted me long term, this is probably going to be long term for me as well.
Where does patience play a role too in waiting for this particular role that you have and this position that you have, especially since, you know, there's people that are before you, you have to wait your turn, get your seniority, you have to wait for them to get out of the way. Where does
Yeah.
patience play a role for you?
Well, I think that's a whole different kind of grind. That's patience is part of it, but also that kind of belief in yourself that it's going to pay off. Like keep knocking on doors, keep looking for that position, keep applying at places, you know, keep asking, you know, like, and keep setting those goals for you. I think like most things, if you have a certain amount of talent, if you really stick with it, you know, I think talent opens up opportunities. You know, the old cliche, which is so true, I'll probably mess it up, but what is it? That talent and you know, what is it? Talent and work ethic beats, oh, see, I told you I'd mess it up.
I thought you were going to go with like it's 80% talent and or 80% determination and 20% talent or something, but whatever it is, someone can find it for us. What is the process you go through, Jayson, with your work nowadays? What does a week look like for you? You're talking about, you know, if you're not on the train, it's going at 5. So what does that process look like for you?
It's honestly, it's pretty fast paced every day, in the sense of, you know, when one show is over at 6 o'clock that night, that's put to bed. Whether it went fantastic or terrible or somewhere in between, that's like ancient history. And then I'm able to sort of leave that and go home and enjoy my family and enjoy time at
Sorry,
home.
Jayson, before you go on to what you actually do you watch a show afterwards, or is there a reason
No,
you might watch a show, or you just let it go to bed, it's done, it's gone?
it's done. Yeah, if there's a story I think that's particularly that I'm proud of or that touched me, it doesn't have to be my own story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's how I'll end up watching it. I'll say to, you know, friends or family, like, I want you to see this. Remember that story I was working on? Here it is. I want you to see this. So I would probably watch my own work that way. Obviously, I would watch it before it goes to air. But yeah, I'm kind of able to put that behind me, which I think is healthy. Plus, I know, you know, I'm going to need to rest my mind because the next day is going to be, I'm going to go back to that word. Like, it's sort of a daily grind for us. Like,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people that watch the show will come up to me and once in a while I'll get that question. They'll say, so what time do you start? Just like 2 or 3 in the afternoon? Is that when you go in? But I think they sort of like this kind of outdated idea of it, or, you know, maybe they've seen something in a movie of how the business works where you just show up and sit down and make up and someone hands you scripts, and that couldn't be possibly further from the truth. Like, on our show, for instance, there's only 4 producers. There's myself and Maria Panapallis, who's been my colleague for a long, long time, Katie Kelly, who focuses on the entertainment side of things, and then our director, Slaney. She directs the show, but she's a co-producer as well. So the 4 of us are responsible for producing the show every day. So I'd like to be there just before 9. We have a conference call that starts at 9 o'clock with the producers of the 5 and the 6 o'clock show, plus management, where we just sort of discuss, okay, these are stories and news stories that are on the radar for today. These are things we have to cover, or these are things we might want to cover. And we talk about this and come up with a game plan for about 15 minutes. Then at 9:15, the conference call widens to all of the reporters that we work with around the Maritimes. They make story pitches to us. We take notes. They hang up. Now we have a secondary discussion. Okay, we didn't like this, but we definitely love this story idea. Which show does it fit on? And out of that call, which usually ends around 10 o'clock, now we have more of a firm game plan for both shows, the 5 o'clock show, the 6 o'clock news, what reporters we're going to work with, and what stories we're going to cover, barring breaking news, of course.
So you're
So
arriving at work at 8 or so?
no, but 8:45.
Yeah.
Just yeah, yeah.
Until
And
6 or later.
then the work kind of starts when you wake up, though, because you're going to check the phone and see what's happened overnight, what's the state of the world, what's the state of our own backyard, and obviously go into work with an idea of, oh, this is a story people are going to be talking about today. This is something we should be covering. What kind of angle can we take on
that? Is that a tough war room to be in?
that?
Figuring out what stories are going to be a go, or
Sometimes,
yeah.
sometimes, because there's going to be disagreements, over which show that particular story fits on, or which reporter suits that story best,
But that would show a passion, right, for wanting to get the right news out there with the right person doing it, and it's a love for what you're doing.
Yeah.
And
And
for
I
the
think like
people.
anything in life, you have to pick your battles, So between the two shows, like the 6 o'clock news has and needs more reporter resources. They're doing more stories per day, and they have to reflect that kind of. Every day they want to reflect the region. They want to reflect Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI, and have some balance there. So on the 5 o'clock side, I mean, we want that as well, but if you don't see a story from New Brunswick today, well, that's maybe not a big deal. We'll have something from New Brunswick tomorrow, or Nova Scotia, vice versa. So on our side of things, we kind of have to really kind of pick our battles a little bit, like with that understanding that the 6 o'clock side of thing is going to need more resources every single day. We have to be really smart with the resource. I say resources, that's what we call it. I'm talking reporters and videographers. How many reporters and videographers are we going to have, and how are we going to use them? So it makes it difficult to work ahead on stories. We do, but when you have, again, that deadline of 5 o'clock every day, when you come in the morning, your number one priority is 5 o'clock that afternoon. If you have the luxury of working ahead tomorrow or the next day or next week, you can and you do, but your real priority is 5 o'clock's coming. So we have to get it. And there's no writers on our show either. We're the writers. The producers are the writers. So, we're assigning reporters. We're talking through stories with them, telling them about elements that we want to have in the story, who we might think might be a good fit for an interview, maybe, making phone calls to help them set up interviews. What are they going to need for video? It's a television story. It's literally talking pictures. So, it could be the most exciting story of the world. If the pictures are boring, the story is boring. So what are we going to do, and what are we going to use for visuals? All of these sort of decisions, and then, where in the show does it fit best? So I almost like, I've never actually played it, but I have a pretty good idea how you play it. Sudoku, it's in the newspaper every day. Like it's like playing a game, putting a crossword puzzle or something together. There's so many moving parts, dozens of moving parts. It's almost like a checklist of things that you have to do on a daily basis to put together a full 1 hour program,
It's nice to know that, because it gives people a better appreciation of the work that you guys do. That, as you said, you're not just a pretty face that gets some makeup and a script thrown in your hand. You've been
there's
working
no makeup people
for the nine hours before that and getting it all ready. It's pretty good. Jayson, you kind of mentioned a few difficulties, but what is the satisfaction that you get out of doing the work that you do? And maybe
There's
as
more.
you think about that, I was wondering, I had a question for you of, since you came home back to the Maritimes, what have you learned, and what has kind of grown in your heart for the love of the Maritimes and the people that you report on each and every day?
Well, the first thing when I came back actually had nothing to do with work. When you're young, like I think so many people, you have this push, this urge, like, I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. You don't appreciate home in the same sense, as you do. I think some ways you have to leave home to appreciate home. And that was me. I was away for the best part of 7 years, and I actually wasn't the type to miss home that much. I didn't get homesick very much. Weirdly, I didn't miss home until I got home. Once I returned to Nova Scotia, it was like I was seeing it with fresh eyes, and it was like, oh, I forgot how easy it is to enjoy the outdoors. You know, I forgot how, you know, how beautiful this province is. I forgot, like, you can, in Nova Scotia, especially Sackville's relatively central, I always joke around, you could spin around and point yourself, you know, 50 kilometers in any direction, and you're going to find an amazing, beautiful, unique outdoor adventure. You know, like, there's a lot to do here if you're an outdoors person, and I certainly am. The second part of that question, as far as Maritimers, yeah, I especially growing up watching the show I'm on and knowing its history, you know, with Dave Wright and Steve Murphy and Nancy Regan and, you know, and Paul Meunier and so many other talented people that worked on the show in its early days. You know, I grew up watching that and had kind of an idea of what that show is and what it looks like. And what I always enjoyed about it was it always seemed to me that it really reflected the experience of Maritimers, that I always thought Live at Five, it could be or was a mirror that sort of reflects, you know, the interesting people, the amazing people, the amazing places in our own backyard. And so I feel like a certain responsibility that I'm proud of. I feel honored to be a part of a show that does that does tell the story of the underdog, or tell the story of the person that's making very quietly in the background for many years, making their own community better in some unique way. You know, the entrepreneurs here in the Maritimes, just the inspirational people. And then there's a flip side to it as well. Like, this particular show, because it tells so many feature stories, we can literally help people, you know, when there's families that are struggling, whether they've, you know, lost everything in a fire, or all too often we end up doing stories I wish we didn't, but there's so many, you know, there's so many families that have a sick loved one, you know, that are struggling financially, and, you know, we have the ability to tell their stories and get their story out to a much wider audience, and I feel proud coming home some nights knowing that, you know, that we did make a difference, and that we have, you know, improved someone's life. And then on the day-to-day basis of it, like I said, that goes back to, you know, just I try not to take for granted, you know, how unique my position is, especially to be doing it in my hometown. You know, so I'm very, very grateful for what I do, because I still have a passion for it. In some ways, I would say that I'm more passionate about it now than I was, you know, 25 or 27 years ago. That I continue to get more passionate about it. And someday when it's over, I'm going to miss it. It'll be tough to replace. That's for sure.
In your 27 years and then being in this position, what is a skill that you really had to hone for people maybe wanting to get into broadcast journalism, or just wondering what sort of skill that you really had to develop or still honing in?
I think you do have to stay on top of what's going on in your world. That's to anyone looking to get into the business. If you don't have a passion, you know, for news of the day, you really should develop it. You're going to be at a disadvantage to some degree if you don't have a fairly wide, at least I'm not an expert on all things by any stretch, but like, you should have at least a general knowledge of, you know, most things when it comes news wise. Specific to television, I think everybody knows that television news voice. I'm on television now, so now I'm talking in this voice. I would never talk in this voice if I was at a host party, but and I think people can see through that. I always advise people, like be yourself. Just trust that yourself is good enough. Be yourself on camera, because I mean, nothing you can do. You are who you are anyway. So don't try to put on airs. Don't try to talk differently. Like, think of it as you're telling a story to, you know, to your best friend, or, you know, to your colleague.
Knowing that you were a paper boy, you worked at Disco Deli, even in Jack Frazier's, and people who are getting into work, maybe younger, and also maybe not sure of their careers. You were up until you were 22, 23, or switching their careers. Do you have a tip for people who are getting into work one way or the other?
I I think I'll go back to getting your foot in the door. If it's something you really truly want to do,
Mm-hmm.
take any position. Take any position available and work your way up from there. And uh, don't be afraid of taking to see where these opportunities lead you. I think sometimes, even if you know it's the industry you want, you may not specifically, you might have an idea of where you're going to fit in that industry, but that may not necessarily be the case. I think you have to be open-minded about where you are, just where you could end up. I work with people now for, a decade that when they first walked in the newsroom, probably thought for sure, I'm going to be a television reporter. And then found, because there was a need, that actually I'm more talented behind the camera. I'm better at directing or PAing or some other role. You got to be. I think you got to be open to seeing. If it's the path you want, then you have to be open to see where that goes. Don't get pigeonholed into thinking this is what I am and that's all I want to do. You might miss another opportunity.
Jayson, what kind of goal do you have for your position or your career? What do you hope that happens maybe with CTV? What is an overarching goal that you have?
Well, let me reach for the mug here.
Big goals, dad goals, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a big goal setter. I don't want to, I don't want to sound like I'm too comfortable where I am. Well, what I do now is, it's really, really unique. Like, it would be very difficult to find a similar situation where, where I basically, with a very small team of close friends, get to put together 5 hours of television in my hometown and have like a great degree of editorial control over it. I mean, the news director knows what stories we're covering every day. We discuss it, but we have a lot of leeway and a lot of trust to tell the stories that we want to tell. It would be hard to get that somewhere else. And then even within our own structure at work, there's, as far as hosting goes, there's not really a lot of. I'm sort of at that ceiling to some degree, So then it would be, do I want to go into management someday? Mm-hmm. And I don't. I enjoy the on-air side of things and producing. I enjoy that too much. So then if I was looking for another opportunity, it would mean, moving away somewhere else.
But you don't want to, yeah.
Maybe to a larger market. I had a few opportunities much, much earlier in my career. I haven't pursued any other opportunities in a long, long time because I do enjoy what I'm doing. I think if anything, I wouldn't mind, and I've made some many documentaries in the past. I'm a storyteller. I love telling stories. So if my work situation shifted to some degree, or as I get a little closer to retirement, whenever that is, I'll still be a storyteller. I think I'll still be writing, or I do have, this. I hope this doesn't sound so cliche, but I have a book idea. I love to write. I'd like to write someday, and I'd like to make more documentaries as well. I see that as something that I'll end up doing. Those are things that I would be excited about in the future. I don't know, like I said, where I'm at now, and I've been here a long, long time. I don't know if there's a ladder for me to climb that way. And I think about that sometimes too. And, because in society, I think there's always that pressure to do more, to get higher, to keep climbing, and there's, people almost look down on contentment to some degree, but that can be, I think, underrated as well. I mean, if you're happy in the moment, in the place where you're at, then that's a blessing that not everybody has, for sure.
I don't think you're mentioning the book as a cliche unless you don't write it. Just
exactly. That's what it's sort of like, because whenever they're like, well, I'm writing a
I'm gonna
book.
write a book. I'm gonna write a
Yeah.
book. I got a few books, just on a notepad for now. Is there anything, Jason, and some of it you've kind of revealed, is there anything that people may not understand about you? They see you every day. Is there anything they may not understand about you, but if they knew this, they would have a better appreciation of the work that you're bringing forth?
Hmm. Yeah, you know what? I don't know. I don't know. It's another thing that I love about our show is um, I get to be quite playful on it. I take, you know, as far as humor goes, I take way more liberties and chances probably than most hosts do. Uh, it goes back to just being yourself. Um, I'll go back. I'll give a shout out to like Paul Meunier. Watching Paul Meunier host the show as a kid, it's not, and he's not that much older than me. If he ever sees this, he'd probably like, as a kid, what are you talking about? But he was definitely influential. He just was such a natural on camera, and was able to infuse humor into the situation when it felt, when it felt like it was right. He just seemed like the guy just seemed like he was really having a lot of fun doing it.
Mhm.
And when I was watching him as a kid, I didn't realize that was influential. But as I look back in this same role, like literally, I'm in the same role that he was once in. I kind of see, and I've talked to him very briefly about it. I see similarities between us where, you know, we're not afraid to sort of let our personality show. So back to your original question, I like to think that what you see is what you know. Obviously, I'm not on air. I'm not always walking around smiling and joking and playing around with people in my, everyday life. I have, I can be moody and depressed and angry like every other human being out there. But I am a pretty playful person, and I enjoy people. I enjoy telling stories, and I enjoy hearing stories. And I joke. I'm a lot like my father, and I've been joking around with my family and friends recently. I've said it a couple of times that with my father, there's no such thing as strangers. He's never met a stranger. There's only like potential new friends. Like he loves strangers. He loves just bumping into somebody and starting a conversation. And he knows so many people because of it. And I'm probably a chip off the old block that way. When I go into a coffee shop, I want to know what everybody's names are, and what their stories are. I'm just kind of curious about people that way. And I love telling stories. If they're patient enough to listen to them, then I love telling them.
Is there any adversity that you've had faced in your life that maybe encourages you to work, sometimes gets you down? You mentioned depression, but in that you can use it to encourage people in the adversity they're facing in their work?
Yeah, I think yeah, it hasn't been like a smooth ride for me by any stretch. I've had news directors that I've got along better with and not so much. I've had, managers that I didn't always see eye to eye with. I've had like, I hosted a morning show for a long time. I wore a lot of different hats on that show. Some of them were promotions within the show. Some of them I sort of looked at as almost like a demotion
Mm-hmm.
within the show. You just kind of have to, um, again, you got to have that self-belief that you're good at what you do. And I also found like everyone else, when I've had problems in my personal life, that you have to really be mindful of not letting that carry over into your work life, your work ethic, your work relationships. I think early in my career, I've been with my wife and I have been together almost 19 years now. So we're talking a long time ago, but when my first marriage ended, there's a lot of stress with that. And if I'm perfectly honest, I think it did affect my work ethic, and how present I was at work. And it was a learning lesson looking back on it. I was very fortunate to have, managers that still believed in me, and colleagues and coworkers that still believed in me. But I've got three daughters, I've raised three girls. They're all like young adults now. They're all in their 20s and living their own lives. But, as we've had issues with them through the teenage years or whatever, and I was carrying stress to work, The difference between me maybe at 28 versus me at, 45 was like that work can actually be an escape from personal. Like if you can sort of get your head around it that way, that okay, I've got problems going on in my personal life here, but if I can just look at 9 to 6 in that work day as an escape from those problems at home, then I think that's a much healthier way to do it, where you can, I'm just going to focus on what I control, and that's like the product that we're going to put on every night at 5 o'clock. I think if you can, that's easier said than done, but if you can kind of separate your personal issues versus that work ethic, I think it's healthier, that's for sure.
That's great, Jayson. Is there anything else that we haven't touched upon, whether it's in your career or some other things that you're doing that you enjoy? Anything else that you would like to add?
Oh, I mean, we could, as you probably can tell by now, I am a talker. I love talking. I could tell you stories forever. Maybe that'll be book number 2 when I retire. I'll tell all some of the behind the scenes stories from over the years. Outside of life, I'm a big believer in kind of staying in the moment, staying grateful. I think one of the things that, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, when it comes to the pandemic, I mean, this is a horrible thing that connects us all, but I think there's certain silver linings in it. If you see it that way, I think it kind of makes you, I ask people sometimes, they're like, do you remember the things that used to stress you out and get on your nerves and bother you before the pandemic? And not really. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. You don't even remember that. I think it has made people sort of focus on, on the things that they're most grateful for the people that they're most grateful for. I think it really helps you focus on that.
Put things in better priority.
Yeah, it has put things in perspective. I love being outdoors. I love nature. I love to read. I'm passionate about reading.
What are you reading nowadays, Jayson?
I read, I kind of go on these, I always have to have a book in my life where I feel like something's kind of missing. And I sort of go on these spurts where I go fiction versus nonfiction. Right now I'm reading, it's sitting next to me. It's called The Demon in the Machine. I love science too. I love like the big questions, what we are, why we're here. It's written by Paul Davies. It's called How Hidden Webs of Information Are Solving the Mystery of Life. And it's literally how physicists and biologists are collaborating and trying to discover what was that initial spark that, how we went from collection of organic molecules to, that here we are sitting here having this conversation a few billion years later.
Are you a physical book guy? You're not one of those e-readers?
I've never, no Kobo. I've never read anything. I don't like, we have so much screen time in our lives these days. I don't like being on the phone any more than I'm like everyone else. I get sucked down that rabbit hole with screen time, but I just like physically having the book in my hand, it just, I don't know, it's very personal.
Couple of questions for you, just because we're talking here, and you probably get this one a lot. What was one of your most impactful shows or guests that you've had throughout your career? You also did breakfast television as well in Canada, or in Nova Scotia, sorry. But what was maybe a guest that you met, or a story that just struck home for you?
I do get asked that, and I usually, hopefully this won't be the same, but it's kind of, I think I disappoint people. I actually, that's one thing that I'd have to prep, because I've interviewed so many people and some some really famous people. But afterwards, it's like, I sort of, it's almost like I forget as time goes by. You do so many shows.
Put it to bed. You put it to bed.
Well, I'll give you one. It wasn't a one-on-one interview. It was in a scrum. But I interviewed with probably a half a dozen other reporters. I interviewed Donald Trump probably in 96, maybe. In 96, he was in Detroit looking to open up a casino. Which was a big deal to Windsor, because Windsor had legalized gambling, Detroit didn't. So I got sent over to to cover the story. Donald Trump's coming to town, and he didn't get the bid. He didn't get the contract, but he was promising this and he was promising that.
Mm.
He just seemed like everybody. He was famous at the time already, but he's just very cocky, very arrogant, and very boastful. And I certainly didn't think I was, interviewing a future president. No way.
That goes back to what you said about the show. Is you prepare for it, you do it, and then at the end you put it away. And I think that's what happens when you do these interviews. You talk to people. It's not that you can go back and watch it and you can have all those same
Yeah.
memories and even the same feelings, but you move on to the next one. And that's probably why it's hard to think of one in particular. And I totally understand. People ask
Yeah.
me, like, what was the most memorable? Yours right now.
There's so many moments, like in sport. There's not many interviews that make me nervous. There's been a few interviews over the years that just because I felt like a fan. It's hard to interview somebody. I find the most difficult interviews are ones where I interview somebody that I admire a great deal.
Mm-hmm.
Because once I sort of slip out of that professional mode, yeah, at least in my head, it can get a little bit awkward. I interviewed the Black Keys one time, and this is, before they've actually played in Halifax. They were in a like a summer fest kind of concert. There was like 5 other bands on the bill before them. They were years from having a hit, but I was a big fan. The interview went terrible. It never even got the light of day because I just wanted to interview them so bad. And then once we started, I'm like a deer in the headlights. I have no idea what I actually wanted to even talk to them about. And I certainly didn't know what to talk to them about that would actually be relevant for people in the Maritimes. Probably 99 out of 100 had never heard of the Black Keys at this point. So that was Guy Lafleur. I'm a sports fan too, and Guy Lafleur for someone my age, that was very surreal. He seemed larger than life to me. David Suzuki, I've interviewed twice. That was like just being able to sit there and pick his brain twice. One time for 2+ hours because he was with me live, but they were only checking in with me every 10 minutes. So we do a 1.5-minute interview every 10 minutes. Now we had 10 minutes in between for 2.5 hours where we're just standing there, just him and I, and like a cameraman and a live truck operator. And so what are we going to talk about? So to be able to pick his brain for several hours. Justin Trudeau, when he was heavily involved with Katimavik, he came to the old QEH high school in Halifax one time. Same sort of scenario on the morning show. He's hanging out with me basically for 2.5 hours. This is years before he entered politics, and so just kind of talking to him man to man at the time. As I think about it, like there's more. I got sent to Hollywood just very last minute on filling in for somebody on a Hollywood excursion once years ago. That was really, really eye-opening, and surreal. Like my career is like, there's colleagues and I that sometimes look at each other and go, can you believe we're doing this right now? What are we doing? Look at this. This is crazy. Like who would ever thought we'd have this opportunity? So
I think you have a very interesting job, and I think you seem or are very young at heart. So many years to you. How can people can obviously find you CTV Monday to Friday at 5. Is there other ways they can connect with you on social media? Are you big on social media?
I'll probably disappoint them on social media. I have my friends say, "Oh, you're on Instagram." I'm like, "Well, I have an account, which is I don't know. It's I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. So they could probably just search my name and find me that way. I find that like social media for me is it's not love hate. It's not that strong, but I just find in some ways our world's so connected these days. But I also think there's like this correlation where the more digitally connected we are, sometimes we're disconnected to the world around us. So I really do enjoy unplugging as well. So sorry, go ahead.
No, it's after you.
No, I'm just.
Well, it's the way if you're walking down the street, what you're saying is if, someone you could say hi to, but they're too busy on their phone. That's that
contact.
disconnection, even though they're connected. And it's especially if, you know, you're on an elevator, someone, hey, and they're not acknowledging you. And you're
Yeah,
right. I think we're overly connected to the point where we're disconnected from our fellow humans.
yeah, I think so. I mean, eye contact. It's like, if you're looking down all the time. I had someone
It's
talking
changed
about
so
self.
quickly, right? It's changed so quickly.
Yeah, I read somewhere that if you were looking down, like if you were looking down on New York or Toronto or even Halifax and watching people, you'd never observed humans before. That they almost look like we almost look devotional now, like we're walking in reading from a tablet or something as we're walking along. Like it's head down now, like lost in thought rather than head up. And yeah,
It's quite unfortunate. Jayson, I have one final question for you, sir.
sure.
Why do you work?
Because I love it. That's the simple answer. I love it. My father raced horses. My father worked at the dockyard for 30 plus years, a job that he appreciated but did not enjoy. And he had a second full-time job my entire childhood, and he was still racing horses in his 60s 10 years ago. But he raced horses. That was his passion, was training and driving standardbred race horses. And I saw at an early age how much he loved it. And then I saw how the grind of like going to a job that he didn't feel as passionate about. So I had both examples right in front of me throughout my childhood. It was like, oh, so I could see like, all right, well, if you're just doing a career just because you need a job, well, that's going to be a long, those are going to be some long decades. But if you find something that you're passionate about and you love, it doesn't even feel like work. And I've been really fortunate to find something that I love. I still love it. Maybe, and as I get older and get, closer to the finish line, maybe I appreciate it even more at this age at 50 than I did even 15 or 20 years ago. And sometimes I'm like, if it ended today, it was a career. Like, how did I go from that guy sleeping on his buddy's sofas to like, look, I had a career. Like, if I never worked in this industry again, people would say, oh, he had a long career in broadcasting. It's
27
like,
years, yeah.
yeah, that seems a little strange to me looking back, but time flies.
Was your dad at the Downsview Inn or
Sackville Downs.
Sackville
Oh,
Downs?
yeah.
My mom
Yeah,
worked.
that's basically where I grew up.
Yeah, my
Yeah.
mom worked there too.
Yeah, was she on the was
She
she
was,
up in the
yeah, she was up in the top
Yeah, yeah,
waitressing, right?
yeah, that's right.
My grandfather had some horses too. Jayson Baxter, co-host, producer at CTV at 5. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate the work that you do, Jayson.
Oh, Brian, it was a pleasure. It was fun to talk to you about it.
Hi, it's BrianVee back here. I would just ask you to subscribe. I think you do it here, and like and comment and share it with some people. You can find my podcast on any of the podcast hosts, Apple, Spotify, Google. There's a whole bunch of them out there. Just I would appreciate that. It helps me realize it's a benefit to you, and my true joke, but it's true, is it justifies to my dear wife why I spend time behind this microphone, which I think it's a good thing to encourage people in their work. I'm BrianVee, and this is Why We Work.